I think the gap between simulations and reality is getting closer and closer, right? Like the GTA is just like kind of one example, but even in like a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of like triple A games, they're getting closer and closer to like reality, right? Like graphics level, like fidelity, like all of that. Um, I actually think that the sim to real gap is closing. And if you are able to like build and rig up basically all the controls that a robot is in like a 3D video game or 3D simulation, and you basically have the train the agent to be allowed to do like, all the scenarios that a robot could do in real life, you can actually like that gap, this simulation to reality gap, that sim to real gap, it's actually like pretty close, and you should be able to generalize that to the robot in like, a couple years.
Welcome back to the Free Code Camp podcast, your source for raw, unedited interviews with developers. This week, we're talking with CTO and robotics engineer Peggy Wang. We'll learn how she grew up a first-generation public school kid from Milwaukee who used Free Code Camp as a key resource to build her developer chops. Her love of robotics helped her get into Stanford, and from there, we'll talk about her work on augmented reality at Oculus, self-driving cars at Lyft, and AI agents at her Y Combinator-funded game dev startup. Support for this podcast comes from a grant from Wix Studio. Wix Studio provides developers tools to rapidly build websites with everything out of the box, then extend, replace, and break boundaries with code. Learn more at wixstudio.com. Support also comes from the 11,252 campers who support Free Code Camp through a monthly donation. Join these kind folks and help our charity's mission by going to donate.freecodecamp.org. For this week's musical intro with yours truly on drums, guitar, bass, and keys, we're going back to 1986 with arcade classic Outrun. The song is Passing Breeze. Peggy Wang, welcome to the Free Code Camp podcast.
Thanks for having me, Quincy. This is super great to be here, and it's an honor as well.
Yeah. Well, it's great to talk to somebody who's working on the leading edge of AI and like applying a lot of these tools, because we hear so much hype about AI, but like, what is it actually being used for? And you strike me as somebody who is picking up the state of the art and figuring out ways to apply it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk more about it. I'm sure we'll get into a lot of this on the podcast, but I've been working in robotics since high school, and then I've been working on AI since, freshman year of college. And so this is like really my life's passion. I'm a huge kind of proponent of like how like AI is going to kind of change the state of robotics, agents, what we're doing as a company, Ego, and also, like how that's going to change human lives for the better in the future. But yeah, I'm sure Quincy will get into this a lot later. I can talk for hours about this topic.
Awesome. Well, we are going to dig deep and learn as much as we can from you in terms of what the current capabilities are and what you're excited about. One thing I did want to discuss is, CES, the Consumer Electronics Show held in Las Vegas every year, just wrapped up. And I wanted to see whether, as of time of recording, it literally just finished. So was there anything that was on display that you thought was like a particularly striking or interesting application of AI?
Gosh, there's so many interesting things, but for me personally, I think the best two things that struck me was the NVIDIA digits, which Jensen Huang showed like I think like a $3,000 like personal computer GPU that you can run. Um, that was super interesting because that if it is true that that could be mass produced and launched like very soon, that would actually change the state for the AI costs because if you're able to run like these AI models like locally instead of like using cloud providers like OpenAI and Anthropic's Claude. Um, that means that you basically don't have to pay per token cost, which is like you pay like a certain amount of money every time you run an AI call. And so if you make it something that's available, on device essentially, using these NVIDIA GPUs, uh, that will hopefully decrease the cost, so that, an everyday person can only like pay like a one-time fee to run, as many AI models as they want, on their personal like computers or using this like personal hardware like the NVIDIA digits space. So that's something I'm really excited about, and I think that will also enable a lot of applications, new applications in
Yeah.
robotics. Um, and I can get into that too, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah. Well, I think a lot, like the
yeah,
big question a lot of people still have is we're several years post ChatGPT, like I guess raising awareness of the capabilities and the rate at which capabilities are improving. Like, how are people applying these tools in exciting ways? Like, did you see any applications at CES where like, oh wow, I never thought of that, or that's going to be a big game changer in terms of people actually using AI in kind of a consumer facing way and not just as
yeah,
something that's kind of abstracted away. Obviously, the price performance of AI is shooting up through the roof, and that's
yes.
exciting. But in terms of actual applications that like you as a dev might use.
Yeah, I think like the biggest consumer use case is actually still probably ChatGPT. I think like today, like I was like talking to my brother who's in college, and they all literally use like ChatGPT to do all their homework assignments. And this is kind of crazy because I think like one of the neat things about AI adoption is that the people who like start using it and are, I guess, like instead of like digital natives, they're now like AI natives. They're all like younger kids, they're all students, they all like use like AI to help them finish their homework assignments, and they kind of grow up in that era, and eventually I think in like a couple of years when they get to college, when they enter the workforce, they're going to be like, because they grew up on this technology and have used it in their school and their work, they're going to continue using it, and be more open to the application of AI in the future, as they grow up. And I guess like a concrete example that I'm very excited about, especially at CES, is just like the cool, especially the cool new robots that, especially like kind of like that low cost like manufacturer, mostly in like Asia and in China, um, where there's like human like robots that are like basically now like actually way cheaper, in the order of thousands of dollars instead of like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, which makes it actually pretty affordable for consumers. And then the second thing that makes it really interesting is that in conjunction with the whole like NVIDIA GPU, like NVIDIA Digits announcement, if you add basically local AI on these robots, theoretically, we could see something very soon where these robots are able to do very like generalized tasks in today's world, such as like helping you fold your laundry, wash your dishes, do all the household chores, and having like one robot to do that instead of like building like specialized robots to do like each of these tasks. So I think that's something I'm very excited about. And
Yeah.
I think like we're finally reaching a point where like, personal robots and personal assistants, can like physical assistants can actually become potentially affordable for the average consumer in a couple of years.
Yeah, well, let's like if let's say hypothetically like AI just becomes like an appliance, like as a literal Rosie the robot. Like if you're familiar with the Jetsons show, and you're like,
Hmm.
hey, Rosie, can you cook dinner? Can you
Yeah.
wash the clothes? Can you do other kind of like helpful
Hmm.
tasks around the house? like we've had washing machines for like nearly a century probably, and
Yes.
those have been an incredible labor saving device. Uh, it's not necessarily like I guess we have a robot that interfaces with the washing machine to put the laundry in, and then maybe they fold it, things like that. Like, I could definitely see how that is an improvement, being able to give more like declarative, like, oh, the laundry, or maybe they just look at the hamper and they're like, oh, I better go do the laundry, right? Like maybe they
Mhm.
can make those kinds of decisions on their
Exactly.
own. How much of a game changer do you think that really is in terms of like saving people time? Like, let's say hypothetically, you had a live-in robot friend that just did stuff around the house and you didn't need to worry about it anymore. How much time do you think you could save a week?
Anywhere from 2 to 10 hours, I guess. I hate doing laundry, so like I think like having a robot that is able to like s empty out my dirty clothes, put it in a washing machine, stand there for like 2 hours, right? Because like whenever you're doing laundry, you kind of have to just like be at home, just like stand like near the laundry, like switch out the clothes, like mix and match, right? Like several different types of like
Yeah.
delicates and colors and like blacks and whites and all that crazy stuff. And then like some of them can be dried, some of them can't be dried, right? And then like folding the laundry and like putting it back in your closet or in your wardrobe or something like that. I feel like for me personally, like laundry is like definitely like a game changer, but also just like keeping things clean around the house, right? Like potentially a robot that can also cook for you too. Like I feel like
I mean,
that would
that would be
be,
awesome for sure because
yeah.
I don't particularly like cooking.
I,
I'm not
I I
really
I
good
hate
at it.
cooking as well, but I have to learn it to survive in
Yeah.
the modern society. So I think like just like cooking something that's like pretty good or like better than what I can cook, it's gonna be a game changer as well. And it also saves on like just like food costs, right? Like I can just like buy groceries instead of like going out to eat if I'm like, feeling hungry and tired and don't want to cook. And I think like what's really interesting is that like bec even though we have like these sort of appliances for ages, like humans, like people like us still have to use them, right? Like it's a huge time saver for like doing the dishes and like wash your laundry, but you still have to like spend time to like physically like put these objects like in the places and like do the errands. And I think like um you know a generalized robot would be able to you can have one robot that does like all of these things, but also like do it in the same way and like save you like hours per
Yeah. I
week
mean, you said
on
two
all
to
of these.
10 hours a week. That's a lot. I mean, if
That's a
your
lot.
hourly rate is as a software engineer, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of dollars saved a week. So, like, hypothetically, if you were to take let's say hypothetically, they can introduce a humanoid robot or something like it doesn't necessarily have to be humanoid, but it has to be able to, reach into a dishwasher and get the dishes out and put them up on the
Mm,
shelf. So,
yeah,
obviously, like the way our space is already designed, our houses and our apartments and everything are with human form factor in mind. Sorry, like
exactly.
I'm a layperson. I don't know a lot about robotics, but I'm just kind of like imagining that humanoid robot would be like an ideal approach, considering that our environments are already. Is that one of the
Yeah,
arguments for not just
yeah,
having
yeah,
like they have like clothes machines where you just dump the clothes in and it folds the clothes, and it takes a long time with the current,
yeah.
robotics.
Also, a lot of space.
Yeah,
Yeah, and like you have to fit it in your house somehow, and like have a place to put it and like spaces are not very designed like they're not really designed for this, especially like I live in San Francisco and like houses here in the city like San Francisco, New York are so small that you like literally don't have room to like fit another like
yeah,
appliance. But if you have a robot, like, well, maybe it can replace your vacuum cleaner or like, like it's like a humanoid robot that's like relatively like small that you can just like fit in a corner somewhere and it can just like do all the tasks for you. Like, I think that would be, a huge time saver. Like, it would be a huge cost saver as
yeah.
well.
I mean, if you think about like the iPhone and like smartphones in general, the iPhone was the one that
Hmm.
brought in the revolution. But of course, there are lots of types of smartphones now. But
Yeah.
smartphones, like there was like this thing that really stood out to me. Somebody was like flipping through like a Radio Shack catalog from like
Oh,
15 years
yeah.
earlier before the
Yeah.
smartphones, and they were like literally all the things in this, like practically everything in this catalog that would cost me thousands and thousands of dollars, take up tons of space, would
Mhm.
involve tons of material that would ultimately be solid waste in a landfill somewhere. Like those things can be done with an iPhone, like flashlights, different ways of measuring different things, different ways of recording things, different things of accessing
Exactly.
media, like
An
smartphones.
app for everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, like they just became kind of these Swiss Army knives, like technology knives that we can carry around in our pocket, and we can do so much. It's like almost like humans have superpowers because of that. So you think that there could be like a single type of robot that is essentially kind of like the iPhone for, uh, you know, home automation?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's like literally the future. Is like you basically have like whatever it is, like human-like robots, human-like agents, whatever like kind of that new term is these days. Like that's definitely going to be a future. I think like the emphasis on humanoid is a bit more important because like
Yeah,
Quincy, you said like the iPhone is like so general and it can do like many different tasks that it's like it's not just like specific to one thing. So and I guess like phones before that were actually like very specific, right?
yeah,
So if you look at the pre-iPhone era, you have like kind of like these all these different like they like consumer tech that does different things. So like you mentioned, like flashlight, like well we have an actual physical flashlight that people would use,
right.
or the phones before that were like flip phones or Blackberries. You had like pagers, right? You had like walkie-talkies. You had like all these like different specific forms of technology, and then the iPhone kind of combined them into all one thing. And so I think like this is a very similar analogy to what we talked before with the whole like the oh you have these like washing machines, you have these like dishwashers, and you have these like ovens. But if you have a humanoid robot, they're able to kind of almost combine them and like be able to do a little bit of everything,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
you
And
could
they're able
argue
to
that like
generalize.
you wouldn't even necessarily need a washing machine or a like if a robot had all the
Yeah,
abilities that a washing machine, they could just use any sink to like wash your clothes
exactly.
and wring them out and dry them and everything like that, and you could
Oh my
reduce a
God, we're
ton of
back.
solid waste,
Yeah,
right? Which
and then
something
now
I care
now we're
deeply
back to
about.
the medieval ages. But yeah.
Yeah, but like I mean, like literal scrubbing
Yeah.
board. Like the whole reason
Hmm.
people don't use scrubbing boards outside of like pioneer reenactment and stuff like that is because it's incredibly time intensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, I've heard that if you try to wash dishes with water, you're going to end up using more water than you would if you just use a washing
Oh,
machine because washing machines are more efficient.
oh,
They can
because
reuse
you
that
stack
water
them
and
all at once.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and like it's possible that a robot wouldn't necessarily need to have all those different trappings of a washing machine with like the cycles and all the motors and everything, and they could just, because their time is inexpensive, and maybe it would take a little bit longer for them to go through and wash your clothes or wring dry your clothes, but you wouldn't need to buy a dryer, you wouldn't need to buy a washer or a dishwasher. I mean, there are probably at least 4 or 5 major appliances that require maintenance and breakdown and are multi-thousand-dollar items that a humanoid robot could potentially solve. And again, when I say
Exactly.
humanoid, I mean like human form factor, like approximately the size of a human, and
Yeah.
with like 2 arms, to potentially do manipulate objects in physical space.
Yeah, definitely. I think humanoid form factor is super important because as humans, we're able to like do a variety of things. We're not, I mean, obviously people have like specialized professions in their daily jobs, but like, if we take that away and like just like what we do in our personal lives, like humans are actually able to do like a variety of different tasks and like different scenarios. Like, I mean, you can run and you can play sports, you can do like all these errands, you can talk to other people. You can like do specialized tasks in
Yeah, I
your
mean, you could play
job,
musical instruments.
play
You
musical
can
instruments,
manipulate
right?
chess pieces and play
E-
chess on a physical board. And then you could
Exactly.
sit in front of a keyboard and like type and like just kind of effortlessly your fingers will move in a way that like communicates whatever it is you want to a computer, right?
And
So
code and build anything that you want, especially with free code camp, right?
yeah, yeah. So
uh,
I guess one of the observations I've had from this, and I could talk about this all day. I imagine you could too. Is just there is a tremendous amount of potential in getting robotics right and potentially incorporating, like we've had very rudimentary robots for decades. I mean, there was like the robot on Lost in Space. Like my
yeah.
dad watched that when he was a kid, so it's like 70 years old or something like that, right? Like we've had that notion of robots, And we've even had like the notion of humanoid like robots, like if you've seen like Blade Runner or a lot of these movies.
Oh
But
yeah.
the thing that has
RoboCop. Yeah.
changed is the actual brain, like the smarts of these robots and their capabilities, and that is like the big kind of step change we've had in AI or in like robotics. I guess has been the actual software side.
Yeah.
But have there been big breakthroughs in hardware recently?
Um, so it's really interesting because I think like the big breakthrough in robotics in part mostly actually does come from the software and the AI side, especially like generalist robots, right? Like specialized robots are very like they're not easy to build, but they're like very execution based, right? Like it's like building a washing machine. If you just want the robot to do one thing, like you can build a robot that does one thing. People do it all the time in manufacturing. To build a generalist robot, especially like a generalist human robot, that's a very different problem. That's and that actually kind of parallelizes like kind of the advancements in AI as well. Like in previously, a lot of AI is like very specific. It's very like object detection orientated, right? Like you have to identify whether a picture is a dog or a cat. And but like when you train that AI, it can only do that one specific task. It can't like I don't know like identify a car if you know that's not in the training data set, right? It can't like identify that that's a house, or it can't identify that that's you know some other object, or
Yeah,
even
oh,
like
crossing the
do other
street.
things or yeah call across in the street. But in today like and like this is like the big shift with AI between kind of like these very specific small like machine learning like training supervised learning models to today's like kind of like large language models LLMs. And people are like Sam Altman are talking about, oh, we're going to reach AGI. And I think like artificial general intelligence. But I think that's actually possible because we're already kind of seeing that shift in the AI space from like these like very specific models that can only do one thing really right. And if they see anything that's like outside of the training set, they completely fail. Um, you can kind of like parallel like that whole advancement in AI from these specific models to these general models with LLMs, and you can kind of see that same mirror, that same I guess advancement in robotics, where you have like a machine that does a very specific task to a like a humanoid robot that can do like a variety of different tasks. And so I think like the advancements in AI is like actually like one of the biggest unlocks for robotics. I think a secondary unlock is actually the cost of hardware has like decreased. So I mean, obviously, like Jensen Huang is at the forefront of this with
Yeah,
NVIDIA and like
NVIDIA's
the
CEO and founder.
yeah, he like is making these like GPUs like better, faster, cheaper, and that is allowing a lot of like new ability to train these like large AI models that can do like all these generalized tasks. But at the same time, there's also on the robotics side, just like hardware, advanced manufacturing, all of that has gotten cheaper as well. So now you have again like these like couple thousand dollar robots, right? You can buy like a robot dog for like $2,000, $3,000 now, and then maybe like a small humanoid robot for like 10K. But like before that, right? Like these robots will cost like 40K, 100K, like
Yeah, I mean, like the
200K.
Honda Asimov, I think was what it
Oh
was called.
yeah, like there was like
The short
insane.
little robot that had like the backpack and could it was
Oh yeah, yeah,
reptile,
yeah.
right?
Boston Dynamics too,
Yeah,
like all of like those robots. I mean, obviously they're like much more advanced and they're like designed for like,
yeah,
um, like harder conditions. But I think like in terms of just like how like consumer costs and hardware has gone down, like that does open the door for a lot of people to actually be able to afford to buy like some of these robots or like train their own AI models, for
right. So it sounds
example.
like you're almost as excited about just like the I guess accessibility in terms of like robotics being something that people humans, normal humans, and not just like nation states can afford
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
potentially invest in. Like, and that's why we had that conversation about like, okay, if it can save 10 hours a week and you multiply that toward my hourly compensation, like what's the payback period? I think that is the kind of math that a lot of people do when they're trying to decide whether a labor saving or time saving invention is worth investing in.
Exactly.
Like one of the ways I can justify having like a really nice MacBook Pro is I've probably used it more than 4,000 hours, And even though it costs $3,000, the hourly, I guess, cost of ownership is like 75 cents or something like that, right? So,
Oh gosh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, and it improves their productivity too. That's another thing. It improves your productivity. I
yeah,
think like other than the fact that robots just like save you time, but like maybe, it it saves you time and then you can use that saved up time to do something else that you like really want to do, whether
yeah,
that's like a new hobby, whether that's like catching up with friends, right? Whether that's like learning how to code more on Free Code Camp,
yeah.
right? Like
So,
it opens up a lot more opportunity than just, the time saving and the cost itself.
yeah. Well, I want to dive into like your background and how you got interested in robotics. I mean, was this something that you were always interested in as a kid? Was there like some moment that you remember in your childhood that you were like, "Whoa, I'm like this is what I want to be doing."
Yeah. So I kind of I definitely credit robotics as like getting me into coding, which is really interesting. So I actually, I guess I can give a little bit more about my
Yeah.
background. So I was born in China. I came to the US when I was about 2 years old. And then my parents got their master's degrees around Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so I actually moved out here to Milwaukee, Wisconsin when I was about 2 years old. And they ended up getting jobs, in around the Midwest, mostly in the Chicago area, sometimes in like rural Illinois, and then like back to Wisconsin, also near Milwaukee. And so I've always kind of been around the Midwest. We spent like maybe like 5 years around like Chicago, like rural Illinois, before we moved back to Milwaukee. And so, yeah, I mean, I call like Milwaukee my home. Or I guess like I call San Francisco my home, but like Milwaukee is kind
Yeah.
of like where my hometown, I guess. Um, and what's really interesting about Milwaukee is that it's a old school like industrial manufacturing town. So when people think of the Midwest, they typically think of like flyover states, besides like maybe like Chicago. But I think even like as late as in like the 50s to the 80s, like there was a huge, I mean, industrial revolution in the US, and a lot of that actually came from railroads, and a lot of that path also like came through Chicago, which is why Chicago became one of the major transportation hubs of the United States. And that kind of like industrial like revolution and that manufacturing capability actually like expanded. I mean, Milwaukee always kind of, due to its close proximity with Chicago, had a lot of that manufacturing capability as well. And there are still like a lot of like I guess like old school like manufacturing
Yeah.
robotics companies based out of Milwaukee, like Johnson Controls, like Rockwell Automation, like GE Healthcare. There, I think even in general, although I can't confirm that. And so you kind of just like grow up, like growing up in Milwaukee, it's like a lot of your friends' parents kind of like work in these areas. And whenever you like talk to them about work, they're always like, oh, like, we're making this like cool new surgical robot to like make, better surgery, or making this like cool, like better MRI machine for GE, or they're making like robots like much more efficient at like manufacturing cars in the case of like Rockwell Automation. And so we actually have like a variety of like really cool like I guess like that culture made it very cool to kind of have like robotics clubs in
Yeah.
school,
So
because
growing
like
up,
a lot. Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you had lots of friends that were into robotics too. It was not like you were just like the lone kind of geeky kid who was in robotics. Did you have other friends that were interested in, actually like maker fair type stuff, like building things?
I would say so. Actually, I definitely found like more, I mean, it was almost like the same amount of people who are interested in that in like Milwaukee than like the people who are interested in that like out in San Francisco, which is kind of surprising. But I would say like a lot of like some of my friends, especially like as we grow older into high school, are like very interested in like manufacturing in general, like whether that's like robotics or whether that's like just like cars, car
Hmm.
manufacturing, welding. like a lot of these kind of industrial applications, a lot of them were pretty interested in that. And yeah, and I think like, I got pretty interested in that too through all like these stories. And I ended up joining my high school robotics team. And that actually was super interesting because it eventually uh like I think like this kind of goes back into like what we were talking about before, like what is like kind of the cool, like newest thing to do, like what is the newest innovation in robotics? And to me, robotics has always been a combination of like hardware, the electrical boards and stuff, and also the brain and the computer. And when I joined the robotics club, they basically asked me, there's like three main teams on the robotics team. There's the mechanical manufacturing team, there's the electrical team, and then there's the computer team. And I was like trying to choose. And then, what was really interesting was that they always like brought this up. They're like, oh, like we can definitely build like any type of robot to do like a specific task, but like what actually makes the robot work is actually the brain and the computer. And so that kind of, I feel like that line like still stuck with me like from that day like all the way to today as well. And I was like, oh, like that's really interesting. Like if you compare that to humans, like what are humans most valued for?
Yeah.
Obviously, like they could do like specific like physical tasks, but like a lot of like the GDP growth and like the knowledge work actually comes from the brain.
Yeah. I mean,
And
like a
so,
forklift is way stronger than a human and way more efficient at like taking pallets and putting them up on top of other pallets, right? Like or
yeah,
on giant racks or something. Like there are so many robots, machines that are like way more efficient than the human form is. Well, what makes
exactly.
humans useful is the thinking. There's this great scene in Star Trek Voyager, I believe. That's the one with the
Uh,
doctor who's like a
oh,
hologram. He's like
yeah,
stuck on the holodeck, and he's a
yeah,
very competent doctor and everything. And they're like, I think at one point they like lost the doctor or something. Like he went off the ship because he had like this hologram thing. Sorry, spoilers for a 20 plus year old show. But basically, he gets this 29th century piece of technology that allows him to like basically leave the holodeck and just
oh, yeah.
but they needed a doctor, and they're like, oh, well, we'll just build one, and like they just kind of like took his form factor and everything, and it looked like him, but it just didn't have his capability, and it didn't matter that he had hands that could like steadily hold the scalpel and all this stuff. It just wasn't the same, right? Because he didn't have that medical knowledge and that I guess tacit experience, the brains of that robot, if you will, that made him
Exactly.
capable. It's a very funny, silly
Yeah.
episode,
It's
but but yeah, I feel like there's something deeper than just like watching the robot recite Grey's Anatomy verbatim.
oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Which is a very interesting thing to do. And something that AI can do today even, which is kind of crazy when you see like these science fiction movies like basically come to life, right?
yeah,
Like within like the last couple of years. And
yeah.
that's yeah, it's
So you joined the software part of the robotics.
yeah. So I learned how to code basically on my high school robotics team. And, a lot of the older students were very, very kind and they kind of mentored me and got me started. And what's really interesting was like while I was like kind of learning how to code, I came across your free coding camp website, and that's one reason like how I kind of um like kind of try to learn how to code on my own. Um, and then obviously uh, I was only yeah, I was like pretty involved with my robotics club like all 4 years of high school. And I think like I was like pretty excited about like kind of the future applications of robotics even like back then. And I really wanted to do more of that in college. And so I ended up, graduating and going to Stanford and yeah, kind of like pursuing more like research, like AI research, robotics research at Stanford. And yeah, I mean, I can talk more about that, but also wanted to uh, ask Quincy if there's like anything specific you want me to focus
Yeah.
on?
Well, one thing that I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about is what the experience at Stanford was like for people. Not everybody gets into Stanford. It's a very selective school. It's
Hmm.
expensive to attend. Of
Hmm.
course, you were able to get in with, just your test scores and your extracurriculars, like working really hard. My understanding is you didn't have like this, you know, smooth path into there. You had to work really hard to get into Stanford.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, like, I'm probably one of like 10 people from Wisconsin in my year at Stanford. Again, and I think like five of those people got in because they were athletes. And then not all of them were from Milwaukee either. So I think like from Milwaukee, I'm probably one of like three people from Milwaukee that year that got into Stanford. So it was, and I went to a public high school, so it wasn't like a private school or anything. And yeah, I mean, getting into Stanford was kind of a culture shock because it seemed like a lot of the students who are there are come from like the East Coast or West Coast, and they went to like very very good high schools. Sometimes they went to like private high schools, and they had a lot of peers who also get into like Stanford or other like Ivy League institutions. And I was like, oh, I really can't relate to that because I'm like, uh, I think I was the first person in like 10 years in my high school who had gotten into Stanford. And like, again, Stanford just like doesn't really accept people from Wisconsin. There's only like 10 of us maybe
Yeah.
every year. Um, and so, yeah, I was actually quite pleasantly surprised when I got in, because I just like didn't think I was gonna get in just like because they just didn't accept people like me. Um, and I think like like obviously everybody works hard, right? Everybody who gets into Stanford and Ivy League institutions, everybody works hard. So the biggest question is like how you like differentiate yourself. And I think like for me specifically, I talked a lot about my passion for robotics, getting into Stanford and talking about how I want to kind of bring this technology into the world in the form of a business or a startup. And I think like that actually kind of relates longer to what I've been working on today with my company Ego.
Yeah.
Um, but it's kind of interesting like how that's like it's more about kind of like that story you tell and like what motivates you in addition to like all those like high test scores that are almost like a baseline necessity.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about that because a lot of people listening to this may be in high school themselves, but more likely maybe they have kids that they would like to eventually go to a really good school, like a really good
Mm.
engineering program like Stanford, one of the best in the world. That many people from all over the world try very hard. Like I don't know the exact figures for applications, but they're extremely selective, and
Hmm.
it is not trivial. One does not simply get into Stanford. I want to talk about like what you had to do to get into Stanford in terms of like test scores and obviously your personal narrative, extracurriculars. Like if you don't mind, like just spending a minute or two talking about that for the benefit of people who are considering applying to an elite institution like Stanford or who want their kids to be able to. Maybe their kids are still young. Like my kids are young, but I would be thrilled if they could get into a school like Stanford 10 years from now. So, like, what should parents encourage their kids to start doing and things like that?
I think a lot of it is honestly like personal motivation. Like I'd say like one of the biggest things I see amongst my friends at Stanford is that like a lot of them are very like personal motivated and like and they have like a particular passion or like a specific thing that they're very excited about. And I think that actually shows a lot in like all these like applications or like what you do. Obviously, like test scores are kind of a necessity. Like
Yeah,
you
like
should try to get straight A's.
if you don't mind telling
Yeah,
me like how you did on standardized test scores, like which I understand some universities don't really require those anymore, but like they may come back. I don't know, but like how hard did you
yeah.
have to work to prepare for? Did you take the
So
SAT?
I took the SAT and ACT. My SAT was worse than my ACT. I got a 35 out of 36 on my ACT, and I was valedictorian of my high school class. So I think those things definitely helped. But those things are not like the differentiator factor. Like you don't have to be like valedictorian, or you don't have to get like a 35 on your ACT, but you should probably get like, above like a 32 or 33, and you should probably be in like the top, like, I don't know, like 10 to 20 students of your high school. Um, and just have like a baseline kind of where like academically where you need to be. But yeah, I would say like, but there's the opposite side, which is like a lot of people in the top 10 to 20 of their high school and have like a 36 on their ACT don't end up getting into Stanford and Ivy Leagues. And I think like the reason is because they couldn't tell a good story about like what they're personally very motivated by, and also like what they're passionate about.
Yeah,
And
and a lot
so
of them may not really be that differentiated from one another. Like they're probably, and again, I don't mean to slight anybody, but like I've met like kids whose parents are software engineers at Intel who grew up like with $500,000 in household income and stuff like that. Like they're a dime a dozen. There are tons of people like that in
Mhm,
Palo Alto and San Jose and stuff like that. There are far
mhm,
fewer people who are, first generation or second generation Americans like yourself who, like one of the things you told me before we started talking was like for the first 2 years, you didn't even get to see your parents when you were living in the
yeah.
States. They were busy working and finishing graduate school and stuff like that. And then you're living in Milwaukee, which is not even Chicago in terms of like, yes, Chicago is like this big industrial hub. Milwaukee has stuff going on, but it is, as you said, you even said the term flyover state. I grew up in Oklahoma City, which is also considered a flyover state. That's something like coastal elites say about
Yeah.
like, anything that's not touching the Pacific or the Atlantic, right? So I do think that the fact that you had that interesting background maybe helped you differentiate yourself from the children of elites in New York City and San Francisco and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping that's probably the reason.
but
We'll
but
never know.
yeah, I mean, like it is so competitive that there are people who have perfect SAT scores that don't get into these schools, right? And that says
Exactly.
something that
Hmm.
you do need to go above and beyond merely being academically, excellent, and you need to be excellent in other areas that are distinct and interesting. And it sounds like for you, programming and robotics was that kind of key
Yeah.
differentiator.
Yeah. And it is definitely really interesting because that actually like I feel like I am a planner, and I feel like I plan like several years in advance, like what I want to be doing in the next couple of years. And once I commit to something, I'm like pretty like locked in and focused. Um, and so I think like, once like I started, high school in robotics, I did it all 4 years. I was pretty committed. I did like robotics research at Stanford. I ended up getting a bunch of internships. So I guess like I can talk a little bit more about like Stanford and how that got
Yeah.
me into like Ego, which is what I'm currently working on right now. Um, so I guess, oof, yeah, at Stanford, I decided to basically, well, one thing I've never really realized that AI was like that big of a thing until I got to Stanford, and then everybody was like talking about AI and computer science and how it's going to be like the next big thing. Um, and so that was actually really interesting, kind of being at the forefront of that innovation. And at the time, I had already kind of decided that I want to focus more on the computer and like the brain side of robotics. And so a lot of like the robotics research I was doing was also more focused on kind of AI and like how to use the brain to basically control the robot. Um, and it was really interesting because actually one of the first kind of like large scale applications of robotics at the time, and this was before we have humanoid robots, which is why I'm like so excited about humanoid robots, is like pre-humanoid robots. You can't actually make a humanoid robots that do like a variety of tasks like you can, or on the edge, like cusp of breakthroughs today. You made very specific robots for very specific tasks, and the most general robot at the time was actually in self-driving cars
Hmm.
and autonomous driving. And I was like, oh, like that's really interesting. And a lot of the developments actually that enable self-driving cars are mostly kind of the brain side and the AI side, in addition to like some level of algorithm like sensor fusion and sensors. Um, and so that was like something I saw and I was like, oh, I like really want to get into that and learn more about like what is that new technology that actually makes self-driving cars possible. And so obviously I ended up doing computer science with a focus in the AI track. And I actually ended up doing a lot of like just like talking to a lot of people in the self-driving car space, just like about their thoughts and like where they think the direction of the industry is going. And I ended up getting an internship at Lyft Level 5. So Lyft is obviously, along with Uber, one of the two largest
Yeah, the
ride
big ride
sharing.
sharing site. Yeah, or
Yeah.
ride sharing app slash network of drivers. It's yeah,
And
big
it's crazy
organization.
because my parents have not heard of what Lyft was when once I got the internship because again, Wisconsin, everyone has a car, right? So it's kind of really crazy how like big the disconnect between like, like everybody who uses like Lyft and Uber in like San Francisco and New York and then like places like Wisconsin where it's like everybody has a car, so you don't
Yeah.
really need to use like Uber and Lyft. Um, yeah, so I ended up doing a bunch of research on the behavior planning team. So the behavior planning team is essentially the planning behavior, like it's exactly what it sounds like, how you tell the car like how to drive in like different scenarios and how do you generalize that across like multiple scenarios. And I was on that team, and I wrote some like mildly interesting algorithms, which is basically telling the car how to like move and stop in like different stop signs. Um, and yeah, and then that was like something that really was super interesting. Um, and then what happened was that COVID hit, and then all like you can't really work on hardware anymore
Yeah.
because the two
That
years of social
requires going to a
distancing.
lab and stuff, right?
Exactly. Um, and yeah, so I ended up actually switching away from self-driving cars and into Oculus.
Hmm.
And the
Yeah,
story
the
behind
VR headset founded by
VR
German
headset,
Humanoid,
yeah, yeah,
visionary
yeah,
programmer.
AR, VR.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did an Oculus internship in college at Stanford because I wanted to try like different applications of robotics outside of just self-driving cars. So that was kind of like a experimental phase for me. And I ended up doing an internship at Oculus where I did like train like ground truth depth sensing algorithms.
Depth,
And
depth sensing. So figuring out how to determine how far something is away from a
exactly.
two-dimensional image.
Exactly. Yep. So I did a ton of work on that, and my work actually ended up being shipped as a part of the Oculus Quest. And yeah, so that actually has like huge applications. And interestingly enough, like all of these themes kind of revolve around robotics as well. Um, because basically the way that you perceive a 3D world, like that perception system is very similar, whether that's using, basically essentially trying to do 3D reconstruction or depth sensing using like AR, VR technologies versus using like self-driving cars and like robotics. Because in all of these cases, you still have to figure out what are the different like things around you and how far they are. In the case of a robot, it's like if they're that far, like you have to be able to grasp and like pick it up very accurately to be able to track that. In the case of AR VR, it's definitely much more of like, oh, how can I warn the user who's like playing a VR game to not hit like that table or not that couch that becomes super close to me. So
Yeah.
the work that I've done ended up being a part of the Oculus Guardian system,
Yeah.
which
So
warns you when
so
things
it's
are too
like
close.
I haven't seen it in action, but my understanding is, and sorry to like you were probably going
Oh
to explain
yeah,
what
go
it is,
ahead.
but my understanding is like you don't actually see things in the periphery until it's relevant for you to see it. Like, oh, your hand is swinging very close to this window
Exactly.
or
Hmm.
something like that, right? So,
Yeah,
so it is a way of like because it would break immersion if you could just constantly see the living room
exactly.
around you. So they figure out how
Hmm.
to selectively kind of hide and show things to keep you safe while you're, swinging your lightsaber around or whatever it is you're
Yeah.
doing there.
Exactly. And part of that figuring out where how close things are is that depth sensing, right? It's like figuring out exactly how close things are because Oculus doesn't have any type of 3D sensors. Like when I say 3D sensors, I mostly mean like LiDAR.
Mhm.
But yeah, Oculus only has cameras. So like predicting how far things are from cameras is basically an AI task. Um, yeah, so, and then I obviously after graduation went back to Oculus on more on the AR side of things at this point, and I worked on AR avatars, which
Yeah.
is basically like face tracking for AR avatars, which is basically how like if you do something with your like facial emotion or show some emotion right now, like when we're talking to each other, how do you mirror that in like a AR or a VR setting in
Yeah.
like a with a 3D avatar?
Yeah, because the 3D
Um,
avatar, and by the way, AR is augmented reality. If we failed to
yeah.
define that earlier, I like to always define acronyms. So, like, for example, if I'm using some sort of app, they're not going to try to reproduce every pore of my skin, every
Exactly.
hair on my head, and like, the exact amount of gray hair I have in my
Oh
beard.
no, no, you don't have any gray hair, Quincy. You
Oh,
look
yeah.
really young.
So what it will do instead is it'll just kind of like this Nintendo Wii version of the
Yeah,
Nintendo Me, I
essentially,
think.
yeah.
Yeah, is what they're called,
Mhm.
Me with two eyes.
The
So
me.
it'll
My
create kind of
gosh,
like a
that is
cartoony
such a
version. Yeah,
yeah. Um, Yeah, exactly. I mean, Quincy explained it. I couldn't have explained it any better than Quincy had. So, basically, yeah, it's basically trying to your best to mirror whatever your expression has on a 3D character with potentially like less fidelity, right? A 3D virtual character that doesn't look exactly like you, in kind of like almost like low fidelity, kind of me setting, like both in augmented reality and in virtual reality. So that was a lot of, you know, traditional with a mix of like new kind of AI technology and machine learning to collect massive amounts of training data and do 3D reconstruction on humans to be able to train that pipeline, which is eventually released on like basically phones and VR headsets worldwide with in real time. So that was super interesting.
yeah.
And um, I actually met my co-founder, in like Oculus, and he actually worked on the Horizon world part of things. So Horizon is the like kind of the VR like social space like UGC platform. Where I think they're trying to do something very similar to Roblox, where they can have like people like hang out in the 3D space and like play like video games together in that setting. And I was thinking about leaving just for personal reasons and some of the politics in the org. And we actually hit it off really well, and we decided to go ahead and start a company together. And it's called Ego. Um, we're building human-like AI agents in games. And what's really interesting is that we've kind of come a full circle because robotics is basically how like AI, like embodied, I would say embodied agents, right? Embodied AI agents can do things and do a variety of different things with the body in the physical world. But what's really interesting is that that is essentially the same technology stack that where you can have agents that do everything a human could do in a virtual 3D space in things like games.
It's interesting.
And
So if I understand correctly, you're kind of giving like the AI a form factor like having a physical human body. Like if they need
yes,
to go somewhere, they like computers can instantaneously transport themselves anywhere, right? But they don't. They're not corporeal. They don't have some physical form. They're just
mhm,
you know there, right?
exactly.
Like I don't know how to articulate it because there's no such concept in normal natural language to articulate that sort of stuff. I'm sure there's some
Yeah.
technical terms for it, but they are kind of like everywhere all at once wherever they need to be and stuff like that. But once you apply, like you take like like I'll use Grand Theft Auto as an analogy because my
Yeah, yeah.
understanding is a lot
Oh,
of
we love
self-driving
GTA.
car a lot of self-driving car training was actually done in Grand Theft
And
Auto. Now I'm not sure if they do like the serious industrial training, but that's a common thing to use as like a robotics student. Is my understanding is to like
yeah,
kind of
I agree.
instantiate some sort of like being
Yeah.
in GTA, like whether that's a goat that just walks around and like can walk right through cars and destroy everything or whatever. I think it was like a deer. I saw some demo video of like this deer that was like
It's
omnipotent.
very chaotic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Maybe some crocodiles in GTA 6 is the new thing, I
oh,
think.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess my question then is so a lot of what you're doing with Ego is kind of giving an AI a body. So it's like, wow, look,
Exactly.
like kind of like the first thing an AI ever does in a movie, whenever it like takes over a body or something, is like, picks up their hands and goes, whoa, like that kind of thing.
It's exactly that's exactly what we're doing. We think that robotics, obviously, like a lot of very cool people are working on that. Um, and obviously, I've had a huge interest in robotics for a very long time. But I think it's just so interesting how that can be applied to like different industries, like gaming.
Mhm.
So I guess like I didn't like mention this at all during this podcast because it was talking about robotics, but I actually like partly like this all kind of fits together because I also partly got into coding because of gaming. I obviously played Pokemon, uh, like Emerald. I'm showing my age here,
Yeah.
but yeah, Pokemon
Or
Emerald
the
and
old Game Boy Advance ones, probably.
yeah, Game Boys, Game Boy Advance. I was not a part of the Fire Red Leaf Green generation. I'm not that old, but yeah. Yeah, and then obviously I had the Wii, right? I played like all the Nintendo like devices as I was a kid, and I actually like during the time when I was like learning how to code in robotics, I when I was like going online, I was like literally looking up like how do I like mod the Pokemon games on emulators so that I can change like get cheats, right? Get an unlimited Master
Mhm.
Balls and that requires some like assembly coding and that got me pretty interested in like coding beyond the fact that it can just be used for robotics and it was like kind of an intellectual exercise itself. um yeah, and then I mean obviously I still game. I play a lot of games. I can't play too many games because then I wouldn't have time to do anything else. um and so it's kind of interesting how like my personal life and like my professional life kind of converged in the sense of ego because games are essentially simulations for robots in
Right.
some sense. GTA is a great example. And then but also like a lot of AAA games are almost indistinguishable from reality these days, right? Like Red Dead Redemption, I think is a classic example. Um, Baldur's Gate 3 is also like pretty cool. Especially the graphics. Even like Final Fantasy, like these days, like look more and more realistic.
Yeah, and usually they're stylized, but they could be somewhat photorealistic if they wanted to be. But usually because of the
Exactly.
uncanny
Uncanny
valley phenomena,
Valley,
they don't try to
yeah.
make it too like photorealistic because then it could be creepy. I guess
Yeah.
humans interpret too similar, but not exactly human as creepy.
It's also like less of an art form when it's like more realistic in some
Mhm.
weird sense because then you're like, oh, it's just real life, right?
Yeah.
It's like that weird thing between like, oh, what is art? Is photography art or is photography not art?
Yeah.
Like, you know, yeah. So
With ego, let's just talk about what it does. Like you use this term, I think it's like endless games or something like that.
infinite games,
Infinite games, yeah. What exactly
yeah.
is an infinite game?
So the vision of Ego started when my co-founder and I were like, oh, we want to build an infinite game, which is a game that you can play forever. It's basically what's explained in like the Sword Art Online or like The
Sword Art
Matrix
Online.
and
Okay, yeah, I've watched at
eh,
least one episode of it. My kids didn't like it,
yeah,
so
it's
we didn't
like
keep watching it.
we're like sometimes we tell people we're building Sword Art Online and people are like, oh, what? Like what is that? Um, but yeah, that's actually the vision of Ego is we're building sort of like infinite games that are online where people like you can like essentially play like any game that you're interested in, and because the world and the agent will just like generate that for you while you're playing it. And it's based on your own like personal interests, based on like what style like of art you want, based on what type of gameplay you want. The game will like generate it with AI based on what you're interested in doing. Now, we realize that that's like a very ambitious and huge project. And we actually don't think that the technology and the infrastructure is there yet. So we kind of have to build all the building blocks to get to there eventually. And what is most interesting about the rise of like AI and like ChatGPT and large language models, like like all these other models like Llama and Claude and whatnot, is that uh, you can actually make human-like agents in games. So essentially, like some might call it like AGI or sentience, like there's like lots of hypey terms being thrown around in the internet. But I think it's actually like a real thing because sometimes even if you're just talking to like ChatGPT, like and you pretend like it's your therapist or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and you like talk to it the way that you would talk to a human, it feels like it actually has like real emotions.
Yeah.
And so when you give these AI agents a body in a video game, like a virtual like 3D body, where it can actually move around and it can perform actions and it can like, maybe shake your hand or like give you a high five, right? They actually look and feel and behave as if they were like real humans. And that's actually super interesting to us. I think that enables a variety
Yeah.
of new applications in games. And some of the ones that we're focused on is human-like NPCs, right?
Yeah.
NPCs that you can talk to that
Non-player
behave.
characters.
Yeah.
So man, there's so much to unpack there. One thing is like I this phenomenon of humans kind of perceiving AI agents and like characters that aren't even real as kind of real and building like a kind of a relationship with them. I mean, like Hatsune Miku, we got like a lot of
Oh, yeah.
Hatsune
And
Miku
that was
things.
like pre-AI,
Yeah,
right? That
that's
was
pre
like,
AI. It's just like
uh,
a bunch
it's
of
just a human
engineers
with
and musicians like
yeah.
bringing her to life, right?
Mhm.
If you ever seen like the long blue Twin Tails anime character, she's everywhere, and it's
Mhm.
basically like this company that makes like a voice thing. So you can like
Hololive, yeah.
Hololive, yeah. Oh, well, like the original product was you could just like program what you wanted her to sing, and then you could control the pitch and
Yeah.
everything. And they had like all these really high quality samples, and they stitched them together, so it seamlessly sounded like a human woman was singing. But you
Yes.
could be singing whatever you want, whatever words, whatever notes, and whatever sequence and all that stuff. So it gave you the control of basically having your own programmable vocalist, just like you could program a drum machine to kind of act like a drummer, right? So but that suspension of disbelief, if you will, the human's experience, is an interesting one because as long as you know that you're actually interacting with an AI agent and it's not somebody trying to scam you like at scale with like, you know, I think it's called like pig butchering scams or something. I think that
Oh
may actually
gosh.
involve
Like
like
all
human
those
beings. But
romance scams,
yeah,
like
romance scams, yeah, right. As
Tinder
long as it's not
scams.
something like that, where it's just like computationally inexpensive to potentially scam millions of people, and most of them will know what's going on, but some people will fall for it, and that'll pay off the cost of the compute and all that stuff. So it's even positive to keep scamming if you have absolutely no morals and you're just a
Oh,
Machiavellian bastard. But
that's very sad.
but like as long as there's consensual interaction with an AI agent and you know what's happening, a lot of people may be creeped out by this, but there's another human phenomenon that is very important to the way pretty much everything works in society, and that is the human brain will perceive static images that are in rapid succession as like kind of like a video type phenomenon, right? Like,
Anthropomorphize, I think, right?
yeah, I'm not sure what the exact term is, but basically, like, if I'm staring at a movie and it's 24 frames per second and I'm in a movie theater, it's not like, okay, there's an image of a guy, he's standing there. Oh, Okay, here's a new image. What is this? Oh, this guy is standing like slightly farther to the right. Oh, look, here's another image. He's standing even farther to the right. Like that's not how the human brain works. It kind of interprets the, even 24 frames per second as being a fluid kind of like visual experience. And the human brain could easily have not worked like that, and then movies just wouldn't be possible. Right.
Exactly.
Like the actual human eye frame rate is like 60 frames, 600
I
frames per
think
second.
it's yeah, it's actually low. I think like there's the human like frame loop, and then there's also I mean, 60 frames per second is like already indistinguishable from like reality. But I think we actually tested this. The top pro gamers like reaction speed is somewhere between 100 to 300 milliseconds.
Yeah.
So even if you see an image like on the screen, like for you to be able to react it will take
Yeah.
at least a tenth of a second.
And if you go to a science museum, they'll often have this thing that'll randomly drop a ruler and you catch it, and
Yeah.
where you caught it tells you your reaction speed to being
hmm
able to catch like the ruler getting dropped. And I think like most people have a reaction speed of like 0.25 seconds, so 250
Yeah.
milliseconds, whereas a pro gamer might have half that, which is phenomenal. And,
hmm
and unfortunately, they're going to lose that as they get older because pro gaming is a young person thing.
Everybody gets older.
Yeah, reflex related. But to get back to to some extent, like the phenomenon of humans being able to build relationships with characters that are not real, that are like AI, essentially, is like a positive quirk. It can be used in a positive way to create like these kind of like agents that people can build relationships with. Whereas if that phenomenon didn't exist, people would just be the whole time, oh, it's not a real human being, whatever, and
Exactly.
just walk away.
Yeah.
But because that quirk of humanity exists, there is space for these infinite games where you can have like extremely esoteric characters. Like, let's say I want to bring back from the dead, like some very, very specific musician from like the Baroque period that very few people are interested, but I want to jam with that person, right? Like, AI could make something like that possible, and it's so specific that there would not be like a market for creating like a Hatsune Miku version of this specific composer from the Baroque period. Like there just wouldn't be viable from an economic perspective. But with AI in the mix, suddenly things that were, not
Not
feasible
previously
economically
impossible. Yeah.
can be done kind of on the fly inexpensively.
And it's super interesting because obviously like there's this whole generation of like AI therapists, like AI boyfriend girlfriend, which is interesting, but like a lot of these apps are still like pretty chat based. So during the pandemic, I played a lot of Animal Crossing, and a lot of my friends also played a lot of Animal Crossing. And a lot of people have like really fallen off of playing Animal Crossing after the pandemic ended and people started going back to work. But one thing that I've noticed across like all of my friends who continue playing Animal Crossing even after the pandemic ended and would continue to spend like hundreds of hours in this game are people who actually really develop like a personal relationship with the characters, right? They're playing because they want to interact with the characters more. They want to build their relationship with their characters. They want to like give them gifts and things like that. And already you can kind of like see like how building a relationship with a virtual character in a 3D space is already like a huge phenomenon, especially amongst like today. I think like people are going like spending more and more their time online and like less of their time in real life. Not sure if that's a good thing or not,
Yeah.
but that is kind of the reality. And virtual characters that only talk to you via text or like voices only get you so far, but virtual characters that can, you know, behave like humans and have a body in like a 3D like virtual
Yeah.
space, like that's actually super interesting. And that has applications actually beyond NPCs and like building relationships with these virtual characters. Obviously, that also has applications where they can like help you, for example, like train a player up and like coach them for more competitive games. That has applications where these AI companions can like play with you as like a character across like games, like both single player and multiplayer games when your friends are not online. It has applications in terms of just like playtesting games, right?
Yeah.
And like trying to find every bug and like listing that report. And having like pinging the engineering team to fix it, or in some cases maybe the AI can do code gen and like fix the bugs themselves.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty exciting. The notion that like something's broken and you'd be like, "Hey, like, do you see that? Why is that tree like floating above the ground? Oh, let me fix that real quick." And then the AI agent puts in a pull request. I mean, that'd
Exactly.
be pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
One thing that you
Yeah.
said there about like Animal Crossing and the characters keeping people come back, I'm convinced that's why World of Warcraft, if World of Warcraft
Oh
and
yeah.
games like that, MMO or
Mhm.
MMORPG, where they have like a kind
Mhm.
of physically instantiated human-like body, whether that's like a dwarf or an elf or something like that,
Mhm.
but like they're running around, they're doing stuff together, they're going on raids together. Imagine that you have all these friends, and they're interesting people that are living in like Omaha or wherever that you're getting on, and
Mhm.
you're grabbing your Dr Pepper and you're sitting down and you're playing with them for a few hours and going into some dungeon or going and fighting some other guild or something like that, and
Mhm.
it is the people that keep you coming back.
Exactly.
Gameplay is not that competitive. It's like a kill loot, you know,
It's also like very old
type
now,
gameplay
which
level.
is kind of crazy.
Yeah, but the people are what keep people interested, right? Like the conversations and like, oh, hey, how's your kid doing? Like those kinds of conversations and that feeling of camaraderie. And yes, you can't really achieve that if you know the AI is like not a real person and that they don't have a life outside of this AI. If they do, that backstory is fabricated because they're not a person, right? They don't have to
But
make rent.
but it's what's really crazy is now if you make an AI that has like a virtual body, right? Like exactly the way that a human player would have. What if you can't tell the difference whether that player is an AI or they're human, right?
So
That's
I mean
that's the
that to
current.
me crosses kind of like an ethical boundary. Like I would be disappointed and upset if like somebody I built up a long personal relationship, I found out they were an AI. Now, if I know, like characters in Animal Crossing, they're not real people,
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
So you can build up a relationship with them, and you be like, oh, that's cute, like
Hmm.
in Mario 64. Like I would pick up the little baby penguin and I would carry it over to the mama penguin, and I thought they had a personal relationship. But nowhere
Yeah.
in that process did I feel like I was interacting with a real, penguin that like had the mortal fear of dying and stuff like that looming over its head.
Oh.
Right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that'd be so sad.
yeah, exactly. Like, and I mean, like, Hollywood loves to do movies about like these kinds of things. Like, oh, what if so and so didn't realize they were a character in a novel or a character in a video game or something like that, right? But like, I think there has to be consent. Like, there has to be
Yeah.
like a disclaimer, like, hey, so and so is a character in this game. They are not like logging off and going to work at 7-Eleven and then going home and fighting with their parents. Like they're not a real
Yeah.
person.
But the beauty of AI is now you can have both, right? So like if your human players or like if your human friends are not online because they have work and they have school and they have like all these like other personal obligations and they have to make rent, right? You now theoretically, right, now have 24/7 available AI companions
Yeah.
or AI like players that you can play with whenever you want, just so you're not the only one online.
Yeah, and that's not
Um,
really fundamentally different from like, oh, my friends aren't available to play chess with me, so I guess I'll play against the computer.
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
but it's like I guess my point
the
is,
computer would be
as long
smarter.
as you just know, yeah, the computer always destroys me. You can like set it to easy, but then it's all, yeah. Anyway, then you don't feel any accomplishment when you win. I want to get destroyed. So, so I think that is like one little thing that I will opine upon is I don't think it's healthy for people to get like catfished, so to speak, into like thinking they're talking
Catfish.
with a human when they're actually talking with an AI agent. Like I think that it needs to be like illegal or something like that. Like there needs to be some sort of like required disclosure whenever you're operating with an AI because I feel like it just feels extremely violating when you get bait and switched and you're like, oh, I really have a strong, sentiment toward this person and like I love checking in with them, and then you find out they're not real. Like that's like,
Yeah.
I mean, just like pardon anybody who's listening with kids around, but like that's like it's almost kind of like that stab in the heart when you realize,
Oh.
so and so isn't real. The holiday is
Mm.
based around, right? And so I won't get too explicit
Oh
there, but you're
no.
like, really? It's not real all these years. It feels like a
Sad.
sense of betrayal.
Destroys your childhood.
Yeah. Anyway,
Um,
so I want to just ask you a couple quick questions about
Yeah, of
because I'm
course.
very excited to learn your perspective. You've worked in self-driving,
Hmm.
and you've worked in AR, VR, and stuff like that. How close are we to like, I guess, true, automated full self-driving in your opinion, where I can get in my car in Dallas and I can say, take me to Peggy's place in San Francisco because we're gonna go eat some what is something people love to eat in we're gonna eat some tapas.
Mission burritos.
Mission burritos. Mission has the best burritos. I went to the best
I
taqueria
know.
last
Oh
year.
my gosh.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I'm.
we're gonna go eat some Mission burritos together. Just
Yeah.
drive me there. I'm gonna sleep. I'm gonna play some video games on my Game Boy Advance that I've modified to have like better battery life or something like that. And I'm just gonna hang out, right? And maybe my cat
Yeah.
will be at my side. And we're gonna
Oh.
arrive in approximately 36 hours in the mission, and we're gonna be able to get some burritos. Like, how far are we
And
from
Quincy, now you
automation?
have to do this. Now that once the technology becomes available, you have to schedule some time for that.
So that'll be like an entire week of my life if I'm really going to drive to San Francisco. I did
And
that
then
drive once.
you can live stream it or like record the YouTube video of that
It'll be
too
like
and
the
see.
desert bus challenge, where like, okay, we're still looking at flat ground. Oh, look,
Oh, what Pokemon game am I not in now? I'm gonna
oh, okay,
play
okay.
like all
So
the
not like the
generation.
view of the road, but the actual view of what goes.
Well, we
So,
could do both, multiple
okay,
cameras.
okay, yeah, yeah. All right, so let's that hypothetical goal of me just being able to sit down, turn the keys in the ignition or press the button, and then just the car figures out everything that needs to happen between there and then to safely get me to San Francisco.
Ooh, I think I'm an optimist. I think we are about 3 to 5 years away from that.
3 to 5
Um,
years.
yeah. Um, I think okay, so for actually if you come to San Francisco right now, or I think in a couple other cities like LA, even though there's like fires
I
there right
think I think
now,
like in like Phoenix or something like like
Phoenix,
Arizona is very flat and has very
yeah,
grid like roads, and so it's a common testing ground
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
these kinds of companies.
Phoenix,
But that is
LA and
like
Phoenix,
carefully mapped out, and they have lots of training data for all the different roads and stuff like that. It's
yes,
not the
that,
same as driving like on highway conditions, driving like, and if it starts raining, if like a lot of different things can basically, like if the car doesn't feel it's safe, then it will stop operating. Basically, is my
yeah,
understanding.
yeah. So the reason why I say this, it's like for like people who don't know, Waymo has been operational in San Francisco for I think like the last 2 years. And yeah, last 2 years. And then Cruise, which unfortunately recently got shut down by GM, had also been operational in San Francisco for about the same amount of time that Waymo had. And Waymo's been working on this problem, I believe, since like 2008 or like 2010. So they've been working on this research on self-driving cars for a very, very long time. And the reason why I think it'll happen in the next 3 to 5 years is actually the I think the technology has actually gotten there. I think it's a matter of engineering and productionizing the technology. And the reason I say that is yes, because they do like a lot of like the manual mapping and um they do have like a lot of fail-safe systems to ensure that these cars like don't go rogue and start like crashing or whatever. And it's uh it's interesting because the safety standards for like self-driving cars is actually like way higher than human drivers. And so like Waymo hasn't like I think it had like a couple like minor accidents, but none of it was its fault actually. And it's usually the fault of the human driver. Um, and the fact that Waymo has been like operating a fleet of cars in San Francisco for the last 2 years and had like nearly zero accidents, right, is something insane.
Yeah.
And like the approach of kind of like generalization is definitely like a hard problem to work on. But I actually think that we are there already in terms of like just like um, capability with human drivers. I think something that self-driving cars have to show is that they're actually better than human drivers, and that's like
Yeah.
especially with the regulations and like just like how safe people feel like being in them. Um, so the bar for them to reach that level of quality is actually much higher than like a human like car like human driving a car or a car manufacturer.
Yeah.
And I think the technology to do that actually does already exist, right? So Waymo has been doing tests for highway driving. They're opening up highway driving very soon. They're available across like a variety of environments. They have tested it in like bad weather conditions such as rain or snow. Waymo actually drives fine in the rain if you've ridden one in San Francisco. Um, and I think the main, and it's actually trivial for Google to map out every city
I mean,
because
they
they
have
own
Google
Google
Maps.
Maps,
They
and
have
they
Street View.
can they it's so in terms of like for any other company, I'd be a little bit more worried about the whole mapping process and like them updating the maps like for every city that they launch in. But for Google, that's kind of a trivial
Yeah.
problem. So um, yeah, I actually think like 3 to 5 years, if not
Okay. That's
sooner.
very bullish.
Yeah.
One question I have is like, are there any big engineering breakthroughs that you think would accelerate that?
um, Fast large language models that are able to generalize. Because one of the cool things I think like people talk about artificial general intelligence, AI, like robotics that are able to do a variety of tasks. Um, Large language models and are in some ways, if you can think of it as an approximation for human reasoning and human brain, if you enable like large language models to like make decisions at a very very fast pace like almost like a human driver would, right, in like accident prone scenarios, you can actually like help mitigate a lot of these edge cases that like Waymo is going to see on the road, right? And then so I think that's like they already exist in some sense. They need to get better and they need to get faster. And if they're able to do that, then I think like self-driving cars that are able to generalize, like minus, kind of the whole engineering effort, will be able to scale very, very quickly. Self-driving
Okay.
cars and robotics in general.
Awesome. And on a related question, like, how far do you think we are from like Ready Player One? Like, I don't know if you've read the novel, like,
Oh yeah,
set
read the
in
novel, watched
Oklahoma
the
City,
movie. Yeah.
my
Oh,
hometown.
Oklahoma City, that's
Yeah.
your base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, how far are we from having this? Like, obviously, there's like the treadmill, the 3D treadmill that helps like with. My understanding is for VR, there are like some fundamental limitations, like how humans perceive, that make it
Yes.
disorienting and nauseating to like run
Hmm.
around without actually having the body run
Yeah.
around. But
Hmm.
like, let's assume that the 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 eight directional or multi-directional treadmills existed just like in the book or in the movie, where you can like be walking around and
Yeah.
you can be in a stationary place. You don't have to worry about reaching the edge of your room,
Hmm.
and you could do things, and it could be like you're walking around in World of Warcraft type environment.
Hmm.
How far are we from that, from not like the hardware associated with like the treadmill type things, but in terms of other aspects of VR that could get us to where it feels like a compelling experience, and it's not just like a kind of a simplified like Nintendo Wii Me type experience, but like it is actually like it feels like you're in World of Warcraft. Because my understanding is it's a lot harder to have World of Warcraft render like on two different things and like have high enough resolution
Yeah,
and
that's
have a
the.
high enough frame rate and all that stuff to make it feel real than it is to just
Mhm.
look at a monitor that's
Yeah,
128 hertz or something like that.
that's actually a hardware limitation. So actually in terms of like software capability, and actually somebody should like build this and prove that it's actually possible because I feel like that would actually be super inspiring to the whole field of VR. Um, is that like you can actually like as a one-time thing, and Apple Vision Pro kind of proved like some aspects of this. You can build a super super high fidelity VR headset for like a very specific use case, and that is to basically exactly what you're talking about, render World of Warcraft in like super fast. I think it's like more than 120 hertz per second in like
Mhm.
full like 360-degree view, in you with like decent quality graphics. I think that is actually possible to build today, but it's not possible for it to be economical and like be able to mass produced. Because Apple Vision, it'll be have to be higher level quality than the Apple Vision Pro, and the Apple Vision Pro is like $4,000, and like
Right.
like most people don't use it because there's like not enough content.
Yeah.
So if somebody like, I don't know, like Apple or like a Meta or like another like $1 billion company would want to like take on this research endeavor and basically build a super high like fidelity like VR hardware that can render things in full 360 at like 150 hertz or whatever, and somebody actually builds a game, right, with that level of graphics and quality and in that like 360-degree view frame. uh, I think that that's actually possible. I just think that it will cost a lot of money in terms of research and development
Yeah.
and just like hardware costs. But yeah, I mean, I'm bullish. I think we'll get there like pretty soon. But again, it's like no, like very few companies are pushing the forefront of VR today, and so that's always kind of a sad state of affairs. Like I'm not sure like how much more money Apple is investing in VR after the Vision Pro like didn't quite take off.
Yeah.
So
Well, one question I have related to that is, does it need to take off? Do we need VR, or can we continue to suspend disbelief by looking at 2D screens and still have really compelling video game experiences? Because like 3D TVs didn't take off. People still
yeah.
watch movies. It's just they don't bother with the 3D aspect because it turns out that it's immersive enough to watch a really good
Mhm.
movie on like a 4K monitor or something like that. And
Yeah.
as I think Sergey Brin pointed out, like if you have like a smartphone and you hold it a few inches from your face and you watch it, it's like you're watching it in an IMAX theater. Basically,
Yeah.
like Google even had that little cardboard thing where you just put it
Oh,
in the
Google
cardboard,
Cardboard.
right? Like, do you think there's like some limit to how immersive something can be if it's just on a 2D screen? Because I can immerse myself in a game of like chess or
Yeah.
Dominion or something like that I'm playing in a browser, and that's totally sufficient because of the way the human brain works. Are there phenomena like that where you don't necessarily, like kind of how I was talking about, you don't necessarily need to have 150 hertz to make a like what seems to be like a continuous video, because the way the brain works, 24 frames per second is enough to like help someone feel like this old Al Pacino movie from the 1970s is sufficiently compelling, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think in VR, it's the technology, I guess like barrier is a lot higher just because part of the reason the refresh rate has to be so fast and it has to be like super high quality in terms of 360 is because whenever you move your head, like the screen also like the perception that the screen also moves has to move like that with you, and
Yeah.
that all has to be like synced up. And then if you if it doesn't sync up in like the correct frame rate, you feel like really nauseated, right? And so that's like the biggest like kind of like tech blocker is like whenever like you move your head, like the scene also moves,
Yeah.
right? And refreshes like really fast. Um, but in terms of like the immersivity question, I think it actually, um, well, one, I don't know because I feel like if we reach that point of like Ready Player One VR, that's actually gonna look, if it truly looks and feels indistinguishable from reality. I think a lot of people who are have escapist tendencies, right? People who watch movies, who read fantasy novels, who like blitz through like 12 seasons of Game of Thrones, right? Like they're gonna want that, right? And I don't know how big of a portion of the population that's going to be, but I think that a good amount of people would probably want that. Now they might be like uh like even like gamers, right? Like people who are like I'd say like casual gamers or people who are more like hardcore gamers, right? Like you never like hardcore gamers are always gaming. They're like playing League like 24/7, right? You never see them out of their basement. And I feel like those are the types of people who would be down to kind of be in a more fully immersive world. Whether the general population wants that, my guess is probably no, because you're right. Like a lot of people are totally okay with just like watching a movie at a movie theater, or just like watching a movie and just like a living room TV. Um, or are just okay with like going out and like taking a walk in a park and seeing the sunlight
Yeah.
without all this like AR AR VR stuff in real life. But I think like given that a lot of people do game very, very heavily, and who are willing to spend a lot of time and money and resources on gaming, I think there's a good amount of the population who would be very, very into this sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the role of these AI agents in making games more compelling. We talked a little bit about it, but like, what does the future look like? Can you paint us a picture of, let's say hypothetically, I wanted to go back and live in like kind of the Baroque composer meta, where it's just like a bunch of composers like trying to one up each other and impress, the king or the Kaiser, wherever the heck they are in the world, and they're just trying to, and everybody's wearing these fancy like clothes, and it's like if you watch the movie Amadeus, amazing movie, it's like that, and I just want to go to that world, and it's not cost effective for a AAA game studio to create, a Baroque simulator type world. But we have enough historical documentation about how people talked, how people acted then, that we could potentially create a bunch of AI agents whom I could interact with, so I could live out my fantasies of, being a composer and one upping Mozart handle or something like that, right? Like, so, so it's a unique gaming experience just specifically for what I want to have my power
You
fantasy.
have a really unique
Yeah,
vision of exactly what you want.
yeah, and like maybe there are hundreds of
I
thousands,
should
tens of thousands of people that would be interested in that, but there aren't necessarily 10 million people that would rather be playing Call of Duty or something, right?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I think that's actually super compelling. That's actually one of the use cases that we do want to enable with Ego, is like you can basically create your own like personal simulation of like exactly what you like want, right? Whether that's a Baroque period like, style composer, like, right? Or whether that's like an Animal Crossing style like Cozy Villager, or whether that's I don't know, like Ready Player One-esque landscape where you're in like a dystopian world and you're trying to save the world, and all of the characters in that world feel like pretty realistic. Um, like yeah, I think that's effectively the vision of what we want to create with Ego. I think the biggest blocker to that vision isn't actually the characters part. It is actually the art part of like how that's going to be generated. Because I think like the big thing like blocking a lot of this from existing, and why game studios are, so they spend a lot of like big budget on games, is because you have to budget out like where the production cost goes, and that's usually more in the case of building these like immersive environments and building these art assets. So yeah, I think we'll get there, but we have to kind of build all the infra that like gets us there first
Okay.
before that vision becomes a reality.
So essentially, like tooling, just creating the tools that allow for game designers to sit down and just have, I guess, more powerful primitives that they're working with. I don't know if that's a correct way of putting it.
I would say we're specifically focused on agents and human-like agents. Um, we do see the opportunity for a lot of game designers to kind of like design their own scenarios, whether that's like scenes or characters that have different motivations, different memories, different ways of interacting with the world. I think that is something that's like super compelling and what we're working towards. But I think in terms like there's been like a lot of like discussions on like, AR, and I don't really want to get into like
Yeah.
the philosophical and ethical quandaries about that. But I think like yeah, that is probably like the huge kind of like limitation about that. And I do think that even like if you make it really easy for people to be able to create their scenarios on the fly and to
Yeah.
be able to procedurally generate worlds on the fly with different characters, that could already start to be pretty compelling for people. And I think like obviously like the vision is, exactly what you described, like be able to create any scene and then for it to generate whole like simulations, whole worlds, um, basically generate the game as you're like thinking about what to play next, not even like typing what's about to play next, and then the AI will generate the world and the characters for you, and you can like build relationships with the characters and yeah, and you can like maybe romance them or like make them your best friend, right? And I think that's actually like that's actually super super interesting.
Yeah, or make them extremely adversarial. Like a lot of
Enemies,
AI
yeah.
things are like based around creating great, um, great passionate friendships and stuff like that, both
Yeah.
platonic and romantic. But I think like the notion of creating like a nemesis who's constantly pushing against you,
Yeah.
like constantly
We
trying
do
to
have
undermine you, like a kind of a Moriarty to your Sherlock. I think that could be a really cool use for these too. And one
oh
thing I
yeah.
will say, just
Love that.
like we touched, we're not going to talk about the AI art. There are a lot of ongoing lawsuits and stuff like that, and of course, I think the artists have plenty of reason to be aggrieved. Musicians, everybody who's creating anything, Free Code Camp authors, of which who's
Mm-mm.
we have more than I think like 700,000 or 800,000 forum threads that were most likely scraped as part of training data. We get more bot traffic now than we've ever gotten. Like just people training LLMs and stuff like that, scraping, even though we have no scrape. So, but I will say there is a lot of public domain books, lots of transcripts, lots of documents that precede any of this stuff. All the people are long since dead, and no royalties are necessary. No intellectual property will be trounced upon if you just want to use AI to create period pieces, like what I'm like.
No, Baroque.
If somebody does
Perfect.
want to train an LLM just on like publicly available information and create games using that, let me know because I'd like to talk to you if you're listening. But one thing I will say is that I'm really excited about the possibility. Like we built like this visual novel game a while back,
hmm
and even visual
Oh,
novels.
I love those. I love those games.
Yeah, and I mean like it's the production value. It's like the true indie game dev. Oh, okay. Let's talk
Mhm.
about indie game development. Currently, there are people like I think Derek Yu created Splunky. He did everything himself, I
Yep.
believe, including the music, and it's just like a passion of one man's vision for what a game
hmm
can be. And my kids love
hmm
that game, and they probably watch me play it like 20 hours, something like that.
It's a
And
great game.
yeah, like, do you think tools like Ego, like, I mean, assuming that Ego isn't just like a standalone game, but that is like packaged, kind of like
hmm
Unreal Engine was actually based off of Unreal the game, and the
Yeah,
game
a
preceded
real tournament.
and
Yeah.
proved out like a lot of the like everybody can say, wow, this game looks amazing. Okay, well, how would you like to license this engine and
hmm
use it to build similar games? And that
hmm
ultimately became like a much bigger business than creating the game itself. Like, are you all interested in potentially going in that tooling direction and potentially licensing out like the capabilities?
I think so. So I think one of the we actually like went through like Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator, and we got the chance to talk to Paul Graham,
Mm-hmm.
PG, and we told him about our vision of creating an infinite game. And the way that he pitched our idea back to us, and he's like phenomenal at this sort of things, is he basically said, "You're building a game that's also a game engine." And the reason it is like that because you're like while you're playing the infinite game, you're basically you have to have like some sort of game engine to be able to build out like all these like different scenes, all these different simulations, all these different scenarios and characters. So you already have effectively a game engine that's running in the background. I see no reason for us to like not like give this technology to other people who also like game designers and game developers who also want to build games like that. Um, and but I do think that there might be like some limitations on our part, like as we like get there, is like potentially we would want them to kind of build it on our platform. or like, build it on Ego, right? But that's a pretty big, I guess, like that's a little bit long term.
Yeah.
And then obviously I can talk about that like later on.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of like analogs and examples, like the Unreal Engine, like Unity 3D,
Hmm.
which is like open
Yeah,
source, but like and it's even free until you hit a certain point, and then
yeah,
they like,
exactly.
and I think that's a very, very egalitarian because it ensures that like people, hobbyists, and people that are just creating extremely niche experiences don't have to pay a bunch of money up front because that would
Exactly.
restrict
I,
creativity and yeah,
I think like indie developers are like I think like even it's really interesting because even like tools like Unity and Unreal, they're not actually that indie friendly if you think about it. Like they're like way more indie friendly than they were in the past for
yeah,
sure. But like it's if it's your first time getting into like game development, it's actually still like quite hard to like wrap your head around it and get ready like just like kind of build things out of the box. And we actually think that, especially like on like the coding side, and just like even in terms of like the UI and like making it more streamlined, there's a lot you can do to make it easier for like indie game devs and kids or like people just beginning to learn how to code or make games better. And actually, one good example of that is Roblox, right?
yes,
Roblox Studio is actually way easier to use than Unity or Unreal. It's obviously not as powerful, but again, it's way easier, and that's kind of the trade-off,
yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I think there's like definitely a lot of opportunity there, and I can't wait to see what people create more in the future with especially with better tooling, with better AI, and potentially more time on their hands with human-like robots.
Yeah, 100%. I have two more closing questions. First,
Yeah.
let's say hypothetically, just like we were talking about earlier,
Hmm.
developers and researchers using Grand Theft Auto as a
Hmm.
environment in which they could inexpensively test out like self-driving car, algorithms and stuff like that.
Hmm.
How far do you think we are from, humanoid robots that are empowered with like the kind of AI agents you're using in your game, from actually being like embodied and able to walk around the world and actually do things? Like, that's an extremely open-ended question. I know there's a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, how? I guess just very vague. Like, how many decades do you think we are from that? Do you think that's like a
Wow.
2070s thing or a 2050s thing or?
So I think it would be sooner, but I also am a optimist. I'm a technology optimist. I think things will be happening sooner than they would. Um, I think the gap between simulations and reality is getting closer and closer, right? Like the GTA is just like kind of one example, but even in like a lot of like I said earlier, a lot of like triple A games, they're getting closer and closer to like reality, right? Like graphics level, like fidelity, like all of that. Um, I actually think that the sim to real gap is closing. And if you are able to like build and rig up basically all the controls that a robot is in like a 3D video game or 3D simulation, and you basically have the train the agent to be allowed to do like all the scenarios that a robot could do in real life, you can actually like that gap, this simulation to reality gap, that sim to real gap, it's actually like pretty close, and you should be able to generalize that to the robot in like a couple years. So gosh, I think if we were to like want to build this in simulations and video games, it'll probably take like I'd say like 3 to 5 years for it to like work pretty well, and then maybe it'll take like 1 to 2 years to transfer that onto a robot. So maybe I would say this decade, hopefully,
Really?
you know. Yeah,
That's,
I would, I would love for that to happen.
yeah, that's really cool. I love your enthusiasm and your passion, and I think that's like a Silicon Valley, like San Francisco type thing. Like, and like I certainly experienced that when I go to China as well. Like a lot of people in China are like very optimistic, in India as well, and like people are just like really optimistic about technology, and a lot of people in the United States are like guarded. They're like, oh no, but what if Terminator? what if
I think we
Deus Ex
have more
Machina?
things to worry about Terminator. I feel like as this AI, revolution gets closer and closer to like AGI or whatever happens, I feel like we're beginning to realize the very like human nature of these like conflicts and the human nature of a political nature of these situations. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's still humans making the decision. It's not the AI making a decision. Like humans would still want to control and subjugate the AI to their will, right? However that may be. And I
Yeah,
think like at the end of the day, we don't have to worry about Terminator. We have to worry about, like Putin or whatever, right?
yeah.
So,
I think
um,
we have to worry about like a few people making decisions, thinking that they're making decisions on behalf of all humanity. Like
exactly.
it's kind of like the agency problem, right?
Mhm.
At the end of the day, like I could release a self-driving car on the road that I'm like, this is perfectly trained, and it could just go and like proceed to like run a bunch of red lights and honk at a bunch of people, or maybe start driving through some cow pasture and threatening all the cows or something. like
Exactly.
and like I can impose my will upon the world, but like there's not like a reciprocal kind of like countervailing force that stops me from like it's much easier for me to do something dangerous or put a bunch of people in peril than it is for somebody to offset that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Kind of like it's much easier for me to put misinformation out there than it is for somebody else to come and correct that misinformation. The old Mark Twain thing, like a lie can get halfway around the world while the
Yeah.
truth is still putting its boots on.
That's
You know,
true. Yeah.
and so because of that fundamental asymmetry, I think that's the main concern that people have.
Yeah.
Because in Terminator, it's just like some corporation that thinks they're like doing the profit maximizing thing. Oh, this will be great for military applications. And next thing you know, the
Yeah.
computer is self aware and decides that it wants to do something that is divorced from the, I guess, interests of humanity. But it wasn't like every single human like rubber stamped that or gave the thumbs up for that AI to be launched. It was just like a
Yeah.
extremely small, you know, somewhat inbred, academic circle of like corporate people that
Inbred
were like, yeah,
Emmerdale.
like we all know
Yeah.
what's best, right? And they didn't know
Yeah.
what was best. I think that's the parable that people are afraid of.
Yes.
But
I totally agree.
I'm heartened to hear that like you're not that sweating it. If that makes
Yeah, I mean, I think like whoever ends up making these decisions will be, like you said, a small group of people making these decisions. So instead of like us like worrying about AI, maybe we should really worry about who are the people right at the forefront of AI, or who are the people controlling this type of technology, right? Like I think our focus should be less on the technology itself and more about the human nature and the political nature of these problems.
yeah.
And maybe we should one could argue we should have been doing that anyways, like, given kind of the state of like the government inefficiency in the United States,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So
I will say
there's
that
yeah.
technology moves a lot faster than human organizational structures, decision
Yeah.
making. These things are slow for a reason because we don't want them making snap decisions. And we've seen throughout history, whenever an organization is too efficient at making decisions, then like the decisions aren't necessarily what we wanted in the long run to happen. So, like, I definitely think that there's like bureaucracy and there are like, guardrails and there are like breaks and stuff like that. And they're well founded. But we can talk more about the kind of philosophical implications. But my other big question for you that I wanted to ask is like, let's say you have a cousin and she is in like ninth grade and she wants to be where you are, or maybe well beyond where you are 10 years from now. Like I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know your exact age. You don't have to say. But like let's go back to you as you as a freshman, but you have the benefit of everything you know now, and you're in 2025 instead of 10 years ago. And like, what kind of decisions do you think you would make if you like with that benefit? And I always like, if I had a superpower, it would be able to see like 10 years into the future or something like that. Or like even like 15 minutes in the future would make me incalculably rich on the stock market. But like let's
Yeah.
say like for practical decision making, like finance aside, but like you can make decisions based on, because you, one of the things you said that really struck me early on in this conversation is that you are a planner. You plan things out several years in advance, and then you stick to the plan.
Hmm.
With that perspective, what would you do if you were a high school freshman in 2025?
Ooh, that is very, very tough. Um, I think I know the most about AI and robotics, and I think we still have a good 10 years. Like I said, it'll happen this decade, but I don't know like exactly when. And there's still a lot of opportunities, like even after the technology breakthrough of like different industries and applications. So if we're looking at a 10-year horizon, of these things getting deployed and just getting newly deployed, you can probably catch the early end of that deployment by the time you graduate college. So I would say just like knowing the industry that I know best, it's still going to be AI and robotics. Kind of like focus on computer science, focus on AI training, focus on robotics. I think that for sure, like something will happen in this decade, and that would be a very good spot to be in by the time my cousin, my future cousin, or my invisible cousin graduates college. Um, but I think like in general, anything in the space of AI is like super worth going to. Obviously, I'm biased. Anything in the space of AI and robotics in particular, and anything in the space of AR, VR, virtual, like augmented virtual reality, that I will say AR, VR is a little bit more of a question mark, just because a lot of that hinges on like big corporate, like big tech, like company sponsorship effectively. Um, but I do think that AI and robotics are a little bit more democratized, so that could help with that.
Okay,
Um, yeah.
awesome. So robotics. Okay, one last question that came up as you were answering that question. So I talked with a gentleman a while back, Bruno Haid, I think was his name.
Mm,
He's on the podcast. I'll find the episode. I'll link it below. But one of the things he
yeah.
talked about, he's big on Internet of Things. He's big on like just like leveraging like microcontrollers and things like that, like sensors,
Hmm.
things like that. And he built like a fridge, for lack of a better word.
Oh,
It's kind of
cool.
like a fridge that like simulates different climates, so you can have
Oh,
like
cool.
you can grow different props inside of it with like
Yeah.
ultraviolet light, and like you can simulate like the level of humidity and air pressure and like all these different
Yeah.
considerations to grow
Hmm.
crops as though you were back in Sicily or something like that.
Oh, that's
It's growing
amazing.
tomatoes,
Yeah.
right? It's
Cool.
like I
Yeah.
think he sells these to restaurants. So like
Hmm.
really high end restaurants that care that much about their
Oh my
ingredients.
gosh.
But
Amazing.
well, one of the things he said is that like over the past few years, thanks to like production improvements and stuff like that, a lot of the innovation
Hmm.
happening around Shenzhen in China, like
Hmm.
just the ability to just quickly create custom hardware for pretty much any use, and the specificity with which you can order just a few units, where previously you would have to do an entire shipping container full of this thing, and you didn't have the prototyping, you didn't have the turnaround time that you have now. I don't know how closely you follow the hardware aspect now that you're mostly focused on the software, but have you noticed any big improvements, and like how have things changed since you were in high school robotics club?
Oh, yes. Definitely. 3D printing has gotten like so much better. So when I was in high school, like 3D printer was either really expensive or just like was not a thing. And now apparently you can like 3D print like whole rockets with metal, and that's kind of like insane. And yeah, I think like I still kind of dabble in hardware, obviously not as much now with my focus in software, but I'd been a tinkerer for a long time. I've like built, physical robots and stuff. And I've thought about just like getting a 3D printer, and I actually like looked into buying one. And apparently these 3D printers are just like $200, $300. And you can also get like a small like laser cutter, right? Which you can use to like make a lot of like crafts and like custom crafts and things like that. You can get a laser cutter for like $500. And like like before, right, when I was in high school, these things would cost like thousands of dollars at the bare minimum, and now they're like, a fifth of the price, right? If and they're only getting cheaper as well. So I think like the cool thing about 3D printing, and especially like, bigger, larger industrial scale 3D printers that aren't just like printing plastic parts, but they're printing like more metal parts, such as the parts for rockets and whatnot. I talked to some of my friends in the aerospace industry, and they are saying that it's just like, easier and more efficient now to like build custom parts. And especially like custom like metal parts, both through a mixture of 3D printing and also like CNC machining.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's actually like really interesting as well. I think the biggest bottleneck there is actually the supply chain and like not the technology. Obviously, a lot of that does come from China, and a lot of innovations and manufacturing does come from China. And I'm not sure if there's a big like supply chain like outside of China, or like big kind of like human cost labor and like parts supplier in the US, or like close to the US. So that would probably be my biggest like question mark.
What about like PCB, like printed circuit boards and things like that that you can get like really custom?
Ooh, that
Uh,
would be cool. Yeah.
yeah, and like with specific sensors and things like you can basically have
Mhm.
kind of like a salad bar of like thousands of different components that you can
Yeah.
kind of incorporate it into your own custom
Mhm.
circuit board that you could incorporate into your electronic, like your robot. Do you think that is that a limitation, like the actual
I,
hardware development of that stuff, or do
that's
you think?
actually not a limitation. My understanding is like it's pretty cheap to make your own like breadboard or PCB or whatever
Yeah.
these days. So to make any like robot prototype is actually like super affordable to do that
So like the Honda
today.
Asimov that was built,
Mhm.
30 years ago, 25 years ago, or something like that.
Yeah,
That tiny robot that we were talking about, not tiny, he's like
yeah,
4 feet tall or about a meter
It's-
tall.
yeah.
But like if you were to try to build like a replica of that, not exact, but like if you were to just
hmm
order parts from like Chinese websites or something like that and assemble that, how much money do you think it would cost to build something that had the capabilities and like the general form factor and everything that he has?
Like $5,000 to $10,000.
Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
not
sure
bad.
what the actual cost of the original. Let's see, Honda Asimov robot cost. Uh, $2.5 million was what they were planning.
Oh, this
Now,
is an order of magnitude cheaper. Yeah.
yeah, and it was released in 2000, so it was 25 years ago. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so uh, and the Boston Dynamics Atlas was 1.6 million. But it sounds like things have moved quite a bit since then, just in the
Well,
past
okay,
25
so
years.
I think like I think Boston Dynamics. I don't know too much about the Honda robot, but the Boston Dynamics. Yeah, I was like one, but the Boston Dynamics is like much more capable, like in terms of like hardware and capability and sensors and whatnot. So I think like to reach Boston Dynamics level, that will still probably cost like tens of thousands, if not like
Yeah,
hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of hardware. But I think like once you basically get out of the prototyping phase and you start putting things in production, especially with, the supply chain and kind of like Chinese like manufacturing factories, you can get the costs of these robots down, like hardware to these robots and custom parts down to like really, really cheap. And that's partly why you can get like really cheap like unitary robots, right?
yeah,
For like robot dogs for like $2,000, or humanoid robots for like $10,000.
yeah.
So that's yeah.
Awesome. That's really exciting. Well, that's
Yeah.
a great note to end on the fact that even though it's expensive in the prototyping phase, once you get economies of scale and scope from going into production, you can dramatically
Mhm.
grow. And would you join me in encouraging people to pursue robotics as you still think it's a field to go into based on your answer? Like it's not everything is not software. There is still
Mhm.
a lot of innovation to be done in physical world with atoms and not just bits.
Yes, I think there's a lot. there's a lot going on, both in terms of software and hardware, and that students or people just kind of getting into computer programming and computer engineering should definitely look into that because people think like, oh, like all the research has been like done already, everything's set. But I was like, no, there's like so much we can do, and there's like so much cool things that we can do, and that will probably last for at least another 10 years, if not more. So I'm actually very excited to see how the world will change like this next decade. And I'm excited for, robots that can help me do everything for me very soon.
Final question. What should people do in terms of their information diet if they want to like keep up on these things? Are there any
Twitter?
Twitter. Okay. Are there any like podcasts or YouTube channels or anything that you're like, oh, I'm a huge fan of this? Like they do like the really good hardcore robotics. Anything that you would recommend?
I'd say Twitter is like my main source of information these days, for better or for worse. I mean, it's kind of weird because I'm like on a podcast right now, but I don't actually listen to that many podcasts because I just don't have time. Like, because I know like a lot of people like listen to podcasts while they're like driving from like one place to another, or like
You
if
live in
they're
San
like
Francisco, you don't need to drive. Or
exactly.
if you ride a cruise, you can just bust out your laptop and work, right?
Yeah, Waymo working.
Yeah.
Um,
Wait, sorry, not cruise. Cruise is
yeah, well, Cruise is dead, sadly. But yeah, I think yeah, most of my information is from Twitter. I do watch like YouTube videos on specific topics, so that's my other source of information as well. I have heard that like TikTok could be good if you use it right, but it's also getting banned pretty soon, so maybe not. Um, but yeah, I think like Twitter is
yeah.
my main source of information these days.
Awesome. That's
And
really
and
helpful.
Substack too. Like if
Substack
you
is like
follow,
kind of like people's
yeah,
newsletters.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I think like there aren't that many like more technical Substacks, a lot more philosophical. So again, like Twitter is probably the better information for more technical stuff.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Well, it's been an
Yeah,
absolute blast talking with you, Peggy. Thanks for
yeah. Thanks for
everything
having
you've
me.
done. I'm thrilled that FreeCodeCamp could play a part in your ascent
Yeah,
as a robotics engineer and now a CTO at a
yeah,
YC company. That's super chill. I'm excited to learn more from you in the future and eventually meet up with you again in person and hopefully get some mission burritos.
yes. And please ride the Waymo when you do that.
Will do.
Awesome.
Well,
All right, thank you
everybody,
so much for having me, Quincy.
yeah.
This is an honor, an absolute blast. Like you're the best podcast host, so this is super great.
Thank you so much for saying that before we stopped recording.
Awesome.
Until next week, everybody, happy
All
coding.
right. See you. Bye bye.